Hello, friends. Welcome to the ATC Double Cut. In this episode, I am joined by the golf course superintendent at Hazeltine National Golf Club, Chris Tritabaugh. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Micah. Good to be back. I think we haven't done an episode in a little while, at least the length of the golf season. So it's nice to be back into sort of writing and podcasting season for me. I'm currently working on my budget here at work, but that's once that hurdle is cleared and the golf course is closed, then I will have lots of time to do some nice writing and some more podcasting. I'm planning I'm thinking about a season 2 of my own podcast, and happy to be a part of yours again.
Yeah, thank you. You are a repeat guest, and I'm glad we have a chance to talk. And we're talking about something today, and this being an ATC Double Cut episode, we use as a starting point for our discussion. We're going to talk about one of the ATC blog posts, and we're going to talk about one that I think it's almost like I won't use the word critical, but important and it's something. It's like low hanging fruit. I think it's something that a lot of people could get value from, but there's not a lot of people doing it. But
Mm-hmm.
you are, and this is the bobble test, or basically daily assessment of playing conditions. So I want to talk about that a little bit and talk about why I did drop the word critical and why I say important and why you take the time to do it. I want us to talk through that and use this particular blog post. I'm bringing it up on the screen now. It's got a title of Bobble Test Rating Scale, which is not that exciting. Not so many people have clicked through to read it, but you and I are going to make our best effort, or I'm going to make my best effort to explain why it's interesting and exciting. And I hope you can give some practical, real world uh, comments
Yeah.
about what you're doing
What and
because
why?
yeah, because even I posted this on the ATC Discord, which is has some people that chat about things there, and of course nobody answered it. It's like I asked, is anybody doing this besides me and Chris? And nobody answered it, and
Crickets.
yeah, crickets. And I know, like, I don't really know a lot of people that are making use of the bobble test, but I am. I've been doing it since 2019, and I find it really useful. So uh,
Mm-hmm.
let's let's uh, let's discuss this blog post a little bit, and then branch out into some implications of making these kind of measurements if we can.
Perfect.
So let's see. Of course, I'll put a direct link to this blog post in the show notes. And again, the title is Bobble Test Rating Scale. Maybe why don't you explain what the bobble test is? Can you say what it is?
Yeah. Well, one, for anybody listening, hopefully they have read your blog post, because I think it's a fantastic sort of introduction to it, or a description of how to do this test. But what it is it's a, I mean, I suppose one might call it a bit of a subjective test, right? I mean, could a person say that it's subjective?
I think
Yeah.
I'm not gonna overstate uh,
Yeah.
the objectivity of it. But
Okay.
this blog post is meant to say that it's more objective than people think. So if people just
So
throw it away and say they're not going
yeah.
to do it because it's subjective,
Yeah.
I want them to
Yeah.
rethink that. And
Let me, okay, let me, I will start over. So, um, starting from the beginning, this is a test that seems very subjective when you first hear about it. And I imagine many people sort of toss it to the side and think that it isn't valuable or wouldn't be valuable because of that supposed subjectivity. But what I have found is that very quickly this becomes something which is very objective, and can your eye in doing the test will quickly um, become calibrated to the chart that you put in your post, Micah. And then what will also happen is if you do this test, so let's say a person says, well, I don't do the stimping at my golf course all the time, so I need to have other people doing a test like this, and it's just not possible. But if you were to say, take 2 or 3 or 4 people and you all go to a green together and you roll balls off the stimp meter, and you in your own mind say you rate it, and then you kind of call it out loud, and you will all quickly calibrate your eye towards the same thing. So I'm very comfortable when my assistants stimp and do a bobble test rating that they are getting the same kind of rating that I would get generally. And I think your chart describes it very well. It lists, it makes it objective, because basically there are things that can happen to that ball as it rolls across the ground that basically dictate the score that you can get. And it's a wonderful complement to other playing condition data points, or daily stimp meter, smoothness, and then as we get into like longer term sort of data points that we've talked about before, this is a complement to that, and I think a very important one.
So the bobble test is uh we're rolling a ball and giving it a subjective measurement that I'd like to say is perhaps more objective than you think, um,
Yep.
because there's only so many motions that a particular ball can make, and
Right.
on professionally managed golf course putting surfaces, that it's really limited to what the deviations are,
Yep.
and so your eye catches it. And anybody who does this for a living, their eye catches it and they catch the same things. And oh,
Yep.
by the way, this is also what golf players are catching and noticing as they hit a putt. And they're
Yep.
watching the ball track towards the hole. So it turns out to be something that's interesting and useful to measure. So we're going to get to that table and exactly what some of the rankings are at the or what scores you would give to a ball at the top end of the scale. But let's just step back a little bit and say, okay, we've jumped into like what the bobble test is.
Mm-hmm.
And really let's give an overview, maybe you and me in our own words, about why would we even bother doing this? Because we'll circle back to this
Right.
after we talk about the bobble test specifically. But it's
Yep.
like, I didn't start doing this till 2019. You didn't start doing this until 2020 or 2021. And of course, we were always assessing quality, but we never put a score to it. And why now do you put a score to it? And why? Yeah, I know I will explain why I do, but I'd like to hear your justification for this. Why are we even talking
Right.
about this?
So before we get to that, I did have one sort of one comparison that came to my mind of the sort of subjectivity of this and how can that work. And for those certainly Americans and Japanese viewers who are baseball fans, I think that a home plate umpire calling balls and strikes is a very good example of the kind of calibration that your eye gets for this sort of thing. As we watch on TV baseball games, you have the box that shows the strike zone, and certainly the umpires will make mistakes or will call balls that are outside of that box a strike or inside a ball on occasion, but for the most part they get it exactly right, and that's just from having seen this over and over and over again. So I think that's a good sort of example from maybe the sporting world of how your eye can become calibrated to a certain parameter, let's say. So the reason I got to you had been talking about this test and you'd been doing it for a while. As with most of the things that I do, they come from yourself, and you'll say, hey, I've developed this test, or I've come up with this test, or I've thought about this test, and I think it can be really valuable, and you'll mention it to me. And sometimes it takes me a little while to sort of gain the context on why it would be important and how it would be useful to our operation. But eventually, I typically have done that, and then I find these things to be very useful. And so, just a little bit of background. Um, I've talked about it a little bit before, but Hazeltine is a major championship hosting venue. Just in our next 6 years, we're going to host the U.S. Amateur next year in 2024, the Women's PGA Championship in 2026, and then we're going to have the Ryder Cup again in 2029. So we have a membership of very high level accomplished golfers who have a real standard in mind when they join the club. And we have tournaments in June, July, basically every month of the golf season, June, July, August, and September, in which the expectation is sort of major championship condition. And then in between those tournaments, that expectation exists on a daily basis for, guest play and just regular member play. I mean, that is what they expect. And they expect that the level of conditioning that they get during those tournament events will be the same day to day in between the tournaments. And so the bobble test doesn't necessarily help achieve those conditions, but what it does is it tells me if we're able to maintain and manage those conditions with the types of things that we're doing to the golf course on a daily basis. And so as we think about, and Michael, you and I have talked a lot about, and we've got other podcasts in which we've talked about the type of sort of non-disruptive maintenance we're doing here at Hazeltine. I think a concern that many listeners or people who maybe are doing more disruptive maintenance, their concern would be that I have to do this maintenance to keep the playing conditions at a certain level. And certainly there will be some kind of drop, but that's acceptable because then we can maintain at a high level for, X amount of days because we did this disruptive event. And what I've come to the conclusion with your help and with my own sort of observations and work here is that we don't have to do all this disruptive maintenance. We can just start the season and we can have perfect conditioning all the way through without Monday maintenance events, vertical mowing, regular top dressing, regular tining of greens, that sort of thing. And what this test, the bobble test, is showing and proving is that that is true, that we are going through the season maintaining that high level of conditioning, and we're not seeing it drop because we're X number of days away from a top dressing or some kind of disruptive event. And we're seeing stability in our green speed and our bobble test, and that to me is telling me that this approach is working.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that thorough explanation. And I will just add, in my words or my way of thinking about this, and if you're listening and you're managing sports turf or you're managing lawns, just bear with me. Imagine that you're making measurements that are an assessment of the lawn is meeting the performance standard, the way that you want it to perform, the way you want it to look. And if it's sports turf, for whatever sport you are preparing a surface for, just substitute in the type of measurements that you would make to assess whether you're meeting the standard that you're trying to achieve or not. And after that disclaimer, please allow me to just use examples that are specific to golf and specifically for putting greens for this particular topic. So we're looking at how a golf ball rolls across the surface, which is really on putting greens. That's kind of what we're trying to achieve. And I get so many questions with some of the consulting work I do about how often should I be verticutting? People will just ask these questions out of the blue. They're not anchored to anything. Of like, should I be verticutting every week, or do you think it's better to do every 2 weeks? Or they'll say, like, I heard like some people are really cutting back on the verticutting. They aren't they're only verticutting 2 or 3 times a year or something. And then they ask me, what do I think about that? And how am I supposed to answer it? I can tell you like the textbook kind of stuff of like, well, it would be kind of normal to, I'll go somewhere in between and say, okay, well, typically, do a light verticut every couple weeks. right? But is that what's going to be best for their playing surfaces? I don't know. I mean, sometimes you need to do more. I have one
Yeah.
client that I'm preparing a report for that I'm recommending that they're going to do more frequent verticutting and a little bit more intensive verticutting. But the main thing is let's measure the conditions that are being produced. So for
Hmm.
playability, I like to measure green speed and firmness. And I've measured on putting greens. I've been measuring green speed and firmness back uh, for more than a decade and recommending that as useful measurements. And I assumed that simply measuring green speed was enough because I assumed that if you have a fairly good green speed or ball roll distance, so you measure that with a stimp meter. You measure the ball roll distance with the stimp meter, and we call that the green speed. I assume that if you have a long roll, that the ball must be rolling pretty well along that line.
Hmm.
And then I started noticing sometimes that the ball was rolling a good distance, but it wasn't tracking quite the way that I thought that it should. And I tried various other uh, methods. I've got a video about this where I describe some of the other ways that you can measure the smoothness and trueness of ball roll. Um, and and I didn't invent the bobble test. This is a long time test that was either invented in New Zealand or in the UK, as far as I know. I think I had an idea today to talk to some of the people who I think may know where this actually came from and get their story on it. But it's been around for over 20 years, and who knows? Maybe it's way older than that. So I've been aware of it, but I never realized that we should do it until finally in 2019. I was measuring at a particular golf course. I can still remember uh, where it was, and I can still remember the green speed that I was measuring, which I thought was pretty good, and they were quite pleased at that course with the green speed. But the ball roll was completely unsatisfactory. The
Hmm.
ball was chattering, and it was snaking continuously through the roll. And although it was rolling a good distance, that isn't how a golf ball on a putting green should roll at a high end facility with intensive maintenance. And so I'm I'm meandering around a bit, but basically I added that to the uh, at that time I decided I need to add this to the set of playability measurements that I'm making. So green speed, firmness, and bobble test. So now we have a complete suite of measurements that are telling us how far the ball's rolling, what the quality of the ball roll is, and what the firmness is. And um and so I just think to go back to the maintenance work to make this very practical, we can decide. So if we have satisfactory conditions, then I recommend keep doing what you're doing. If you have unsatisfactory conditions, you can then take steps to improve the conditions, and you can use the changes in the test that in the changes in the measurements that you make, you can use those to tell if the work that you've changed is having the desired result. And then you can then calibrate how much verticutting you may do for your particular grass in a particular season, given the weather that you had this year, and so on and so forth. So to me, it just seems like why would I change top dressing or why would I change verticutting if I'm not measuring what the results are that it has on the grass? Once you start measuring this, it seems essential. Maybe essential is a better word than critical, which I used earlier.
Hmm.
But to me, it it's something that I really struggle to make textbook recommendations because I've always said, like, if you just follow the textbook, you can get mediocre conditions. But there's not very many greenkeepers out there, golf course superintendents out there who are striving to achieve mediocre conditions or produce mediocre conditions. Everybody, whether they're at a high budget club or a low budget club, tournament course or not a tournament course, they're trying to do the absolute best that they can. And I think that by measuring what you're actually producing and it doesn't take too much time. It can be
Mhm.
transformative in the way that you think about the work. And that's it has been for me also, because this is not the type of lecture or soliloquy I would have made in 2009. You know, I I wasn't so into this kind of stuff back in 2009.
Well, and just to sort of, some may feel like, well, this is just, Chris and Micah trying to prove that you don't want to do all kinds of work. But, I think that an example, and this is sort of, I guess, theoretical. It's not an example that I have that comes from my own experience, but we've all sort of watched PGA Tour events during the winter months that take place on the west coast of the United States, where greens tend to be predominantly POA. And, golfers are oftentimes critical, although I think superintendents and greenkeepers have gotten better. So I think some of that criticism has gone away, but we all can remember hearing that. And golfers talk about the ball bouncing across POA greens that are seeding, or they refer to it as cauliflower, or they talk about the 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 grass blooming over the course of the day, and then it gets bumpier. All this stuff that we kind of know is like golfer speak. Um, but I could imagine a person who is managing greens in that type of situation to say, okay, I want to try something different this year and see if I can improve that winter ball roll. And they do something, and they think, well, it might be better, it might not. But if you're doing a test like this, if you're taking this test and then you're judging the things that you did, the change that you made, and you look at it year over year, will very quickly be able to determine if the practices you're doing, or the change you have made, is having a positive impact on ball roll or not. So this isn't just about um, doing, as Micah said, nothing or minimal. I mean, that's what it is for me at our facility. But as Micah said, it may be at other facilities. It may be about proving the worth or non-worth of practices that are being put into place to improve the surfaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a lot of places that need to put more sand, or they need to verticut more, or they need to double cut more, or they need to circle cut, or they need to aerify, or they need to improve drainage, or they need to remove trees that are causing shade problems and stuff like that. Right? If you
Mm-hmm.
have these kind of data, then you can say, look, the reason why we're not achieving the results is because we haven't been able to do these maintenance practices that are essential, or we haven't been able to do enough of them, or we need more maintenance Mondays, or we need to verticut every Monday for 8 weeks in a row and get more grass off of these greens so it smooths out, and we need to top dress
Mm-hmm.
4 times pretty heavy during that period. These kind of data, um, so it's not only the bobble test, but the bobble test to me is a key component of it, together with the green speed, together with the firmness assessment. That and I'm always assuming that we have 100% grass cover. So that just kind of goes without saying. I've mentioned it before, but if we don't have 100% grass cover, I'd like to work on that first and then start worrying about the playability. So
Mm-hmm.
it's assuming that we have 100% grass cover. Now we're trying to have the playability as good as it can be. And I think that these kind of data can also be used to justify doing more work. And it's the same thing that I hope you'll join me, and we'll do our year in review, looking at your soil test results in your OM246 on an ATC office hours in a month or so, when we have some results and have a bit more time, and we can discuss that. But really, with the OM246, I'm changing subjects a little bit, but when you're
Mm-hmm.
measuring the total organic material, and now looking at some of the sand fractions that we're looking at to see the particle sizes of the materials right at the surface of a green, looking at how that changes over time, to me, is a wonderful way to either to tell that doing less is working, or to make a strong argument of this is not working. We need to do more. We're going in the wrong direction. But
Correct.
but it needs to be coupled with the playability measurement. And that's
Yeah.
why I sometimes say not anchored or untethered or coupled or uncoupled.
Yeah.
And what I mean
Yeah.
is we and that's why, yeah, I'll say it. I don't like the word agronomy as it relates to greenkeeping. Now, if you're an agronomist or you're in an agronomy center, or if you're running an agronomy department or whatever, if that's your job title and that's what the sign says and the name card and everything, that's cool. I don't mean to criticize that, but I think that the thinking that we have should be more of a greenkeeping type of thinking, where we're coupling, where we're linking together the agronomic work that gets done. So the agronomic part is about growing grass, managing soil. But if we only do that and 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 we don't measure what the results are, I don't think we can do the job as good as we can.
Well, and I used to be someone who thought that, you know, disruptive maintenance had to take place at some point leading up to an event. I can remember where my approach, I talked about how we have our big club events at the end of June, end of July, end of August, and then kind of mid to end of September. And so my approach for a long time was that I would do the work at the beginning of those months that I thought we needed to do to get the greens in the best condition at the end of the month. And um, what this test um, and again linking it, putting it together with green speed has told me, like, that just isn't necessary. We can just be good at the beginning of the month, in the middle of the month, at the end of the month, and then rather than have to um, give the greens a spa day. That's a term I think we've maybe seen part of the turf Twitter verse. Um, because we just had a big event, we don't need to do that. Yeah, sure, we might skip a day of mowing or something of that nature, but generally, we can come out the Monday after one of our big events, and I can feel quite confident that we don't need to do some kind of maintenance event to the greens to make sure that they're ready for the next event. They just are ready, and they are good, and they continue to be good day after day after day. And the practices that we're putting into place and the approach that we're taking thus far, really over the course of now, well, at least 3 seasons, has not caused any sort of detrimental effect to the playing conditions. In fact, I think they just keep getting better and better and more consistent. And that's a pretty good indicator of things going well. I mean, golfer commentary is another sort of subjective type of thing, but our golfers are very happy with the consistency that we provide, and you will all know, everyone listening will know that when conditions slip or when they aren't as good as they maybe should be, that golfers will certainly comment on that, and we don't hear those kind of comments.
That's awesome. You and your team must have had a good year and be enjoying the autumn.
We did. It was for the second, almost, I guess, for sure the second, but kind of the third straight year, we had a pretty dry year. Quite a bit of drought, actually. Most of Minnesota was in pretty severe drought, according to the drought monitor, and I think that can make for quite good golfing conditions. But it does get tiring to have to think about irrigation every day, and we certainly have areas on the golf course that aren't covered as well as we'd like irrigation. So, but then in the last month, or it's been about a month, we've had 10 inches of rain. So everything is quite green, and I might use the word lush again, but the playing conditions continue to be good, and that's another example that I would give, is that we maintain really great playing conditions throughout various weather events. So when the course is dry and we're irrigating by hand and we're using overhead irrigation, the course will be very consistent. And then when we get into wet periods, there is obviously some amount of change in the conditioning that comes with that, but we quite quickly sort of, if you imagine a boat that's wobbly, and you push on one end of a kid's toy boat and it wobbles, how quickly does it sort of, our surfaces come back to sort of the norm quite quickly after, a big rain event or something like that. So, again, it's just more proof that I think what we're doing is working, and the approach we're taking is working, and it's satisfying the people who play golf out here, and it's making life, not that this is all about making our life as turf managers easier, but certainly if we can make that aspect of things easier, then it allows us to concentrate on other things that can provide a better experience in different areas.
Chris, thank you. I'm going to bring up now the blog post again. I've been showing for those watching on video. I've been showing just Chris and I'm going to bring that blog post back up and show that picture of me stimping. That was at the 2023 KBC Augusta tournament. I'm rolling a ball down a ramp, and when I roll the ball down the ramp, I am making a stimp meter measurement, but I also watch how the ball rolls and I perform the bobble test. I want to talk a little bit about how this actually works, because during the 2023...
Let me interrupt, Micah. I think you're showing the picture that I commented on the other day, and I noticed when I first looked at that picture, I thought, does he have a light or something strapped to his pant leg in that picture? And then I looked at it carefully and I noticed it's a very industrial looking dragonfly.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm just bringing this up to full size now, so anybody watching can see that there's a dragonfly very prominently attached to my left pants leg. And yeah. So did you have a question about that, or you don't wear insect brooches or what?
That's probably a dragon. I think in the United States, I think a lot of people wear dragonfly like a brooch or something with a dragonfly, and it's meant to bring good. I don't know if it's good karma or good good vibes, or that kind of thing. It's meant to be a good a positive sort of thing. And I wondered if that was if you had strapped that dragonfly to your leg for that purpose, or if it was just a live dragonfly who decided that was a good place to rest.
I thought that thank you for asking the question. I'm shocked. Well, I mean, I'm glad that you noticed, and thank you for noticing, and then thank you for mentioning this, so I have a chance to explain myself, because I actually prepared some remarks about this that I was going to deliver somehow in August, at the time when I first acquired one of these and first started wearing one of these dragonflies. And so Andrew McDaniel and I had some fun at the KBC Augusta tournament, shared a few photos. The dragonfly was on Andrew's cap one time on a YouTube video, and there were just various places where we shared the image or the video of it. And you are the first person now outside of Japan who has remarked on it. So this is my first chance to explain. So here we go. The dragonfly, as insects go, it is an apex predator. Okay? So in the air, in the skies, the dragonfly is an apex predator. When I am out there stimping, when I'm out there performing the bobble test, I cannot be flinching. I have to be still. I can't be, wobbling around, moving my arms, swatting horse flies away, trying to scare mosquitoes away or anything like that. So the dragonfly, being an apex predator, it will trigger a fight or flight response in other insects. So that's the concept. And a lot of caddies in Japan are wearing these. It'll scare horse flies away. That's the idea. And so the golf course mechanic the equipment manager at Kea Golf Club had an extra one that he gave me at the start of the week, and so I started wearing that to remove, to keep mosquitoes away. And I will tell you, I was not bitten by a single mosquito all week, which is
Oh my
remarkable.
gosh.
And in fact, it doesn't just trigger a fight or flight response in insects. I scared myself a couple times when I bumped my leg against a workman tire where the insect had been pinned on my leg, and I was like, and then I looked down and see the dragonfly. It's like, oh no, what's that? And flinched. So it is a bit of fun. Now, also,
I should say this is reminding me of something.
okay,
Um, when you started talking about apex predator and being used to scare things away, and allowing for a more comfortable sort of, stim meter experience. And I would say that, that reminds me of the coyotes that we employed during the last 2 days of the Ryder Cup in 2016.
yeah, that would be a good type of comparison. Um, so yeah, the dragonfly, I don't really want to coat myself. I've used a lot of insect repellent in the past, but if I
Mhm.
don't have to coat my skin in pesticide, I would rather not. And it's also a nice conversation piece. So in Japan, when I was wearing it, sometimes on my shoulder, sometimes on my pants leg, sometimes on my cap, and various people would come up and ask me about it, compliment me on it. I mean, it looks good, and they're very popular. They become popular. A lot of farmers will wear them,
Okay.
typically on the back of your cap to keep a
Yep.
horsefly or something or mosquitoes from
Yep.
attacking the back of your neck. And in fact, they're so popular. I was down in Kagoshima in early September in southern Kyushu and went to a few like home and garden stores and inquired about purchasing more because I wanted to take back to Thailand, where there's
Mhm.
a lot of mosquitoes, and they were sold out. So it's
Wow.
yeah. So
Well, I expected to do this show offering insight into the bobble test, and I think we may have usurped the insight into the bobble test with the insight into this dragonfly, because I'm fascinated by this. We tend to have quite a few bugs here in Minnesota, horse flies and gnats and mosquitoes, and
well,
yeah, I think
yeah.
I might
So
need to employ the dragonfly next year.
yeah, so I heard, uh, yeah. uh, Let's see. How should I phrase this? I've got a couple things I wanted to say. One is that I'd heard that that people some people in Japan told me that they'd heard that people in Canada or people in the upper Midwest, like Minnesota, would use something like this, and apparently that's not the case. I'd never heard of it.
This is the first time I've heard of it for a bug insect deterrent.
Hmm.
I've heard of it in the other way. Like my wife mentioned that to me, that people wear it as kind of a fashion thing, or like to bring good luck or to bring good sort of karma. But this is the first I've heard about it for insects. But uh, you know, there's lots of things I haven't heard about before that are going on, and
Yeah, this is yeah
that
this
could
one.
be the case. This could be another one.
Yeah, this is yeah. People are telling me it's so popular, and
Hmm.
but like, yeah, I didn't see a lot of other people wearing it. But if you do, it's like greenkeepers, caddies,
Hmm.
farmers, people that work outside. But
Yeah.
you probably wouldn't
Yeah.
find it. I thought
Well,
it would be fun to wear it in central Tokyo and draw a few, yeah, good conversation piece and
probably
going.
fewer bugs, and that might be more like house flies in central Tokyo, I would
Yeah.
think.
And then, so the other thing I was going to say is I did take it back to Thailand. I acquired another one during the week. And so I've got two, and I brought them back to Thailand for a short stay that I had in Thailand. And my wife said, well, it probably won't work on Thai mosquitoes. And I will say that I was bitten by some mosquitoes in Thailand. And the problem is, like, I'd be wearing it on my shoulder, like on my left shoulder, and then my right ankle would get bitten by a mosquito or something. So
Hmm.
it's like, yeah, I think if you're out moving that's like sitting at my desk. But if you're out moving
Yeah.
around, maybe that it has that apex predator
Yeah.
type of effect. So anyway,
Very
I'm very
interesting.
interested to know if it could work in Minnesota.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to give it a try next year. We're kind of past bug season here, but next year it always comes again. So next year I'll give it a try.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to digress and explain a little bit about insects and apex
We can
predators.
get back to the bobble test.
Yeah. So we'll go back to the bobble test. So I'm gonna basically I'm gonna go through now what happens when you roll the ball, because the reason why I wrote this particular blog post is because during the KBC Augusta tournament, I rolled, how many did I roll? I wrote it there. At the end of August, I scored 1,074 ball rolls during the KBC Augusta tournament. So that's the number of bobble test scores, or the number of rolls down a Stimpmeter that I gave a bobble test score to, which, you stimp a few greens a day a few times, and you do it in the morning and the afternoon, and the rolls start to add up, and it came to 1,074. So as I was doing that 1,074 times, I was thinking, everybody says this is subjective. Everybody says this is subjective. And I'm like, but I'm getting pretty good numbers, and it's pretty consistent, right? And I'm like, and it's like, there's really not so much doubt in my mind about what the score is. And I'm like, I'm going to write about this. I'm going to write in a table and just explain how this works, and try to convince some more people to do it. And I said, and I want to talk with Chris about it, which the main reason why I wanted to invite you to talk about this particular blog post on the show is because I expect that you, having done this thousands of times also, will have come to the same scoring scale, because we're basing this off the STRI scale. There's an article from the 2010 Green Section Record. The title of that article is Perfectly True. It's by Richard Windows and Henry Bechelet. It is a classic article, and they describe how to do the bobble test. And in it, there's a table that gives a definition of what you can expect with a score of 10, which is no chatter or snaking, perfect roll. They don't give a definition for a 9. They leave it up to the reader. They leave it up to the person making the test to distinguish between a 10 and an 8. So something that falls between a 10, which is no chatter or snaking, perfect roll, according to the STRI definition, and 8 is described as predominantly smooth, but with single isolated chatter events and minimal snaking. And then you go down to 7, it's blank, and 6 is chatter dominates with possibly single bobble events and some snaking. So they're using words here, chatter, bobble, and snaking, and it goes all the way down to the worst score of 2, which is bobbling and snaking, ball bouncing around, ball stops abruptly. Let's go through what these terms mean, and because you're looking for 3 things, and I look for them in this order because this is both the magnitude of a problem that you have, and also the order in which they kind of happen, because snaking tends to happen last. So the first thing that I'm looking for is bobble. Bobble is defined as distinct vertical movement where the ball leaves the ground. If it hits a grain of sand, a big grain of sand or gravel that came out of a bunker, or if it hits a pitch mark, or if it hits one of those cauliflowers from Poa annua or something, and if the ball leaves the ground, that is bobble. So the first thing I'm looking for is there bobble or not? If there is bobble, how many times did it happen? The second thing I'm looking for is chatter. Chatter is defined as distinct vertical vibrations discernible, but ball does not leave the ground. So then I'm looking, is there chatter? And then I'm counting how many times did that happen? Did it chatter for only one little section of the roll, or did it chatter again and then roll smooth, and then chatter again and then roll smooth? And then finally, I'm looking for snaking. Snaking is lateral deviation from the intended path. And so I'm looking for those 3 things. and it might seem like a lot to keep in your head, but after you do this 20 times, 30 times, then it's in your head and you don't forget it, and it's pretty simple.
Yep.
Okay. So,
It's very easy. It sounds, as I'm sitting here listening to you describe it, I think to myself, to someone who hasn't done this, that sounds very complicated. To me, this is like anything in which context is important. You know, if you are, I think about it oftentimes when somebody puts a spreadsheet up on a computer screen and I have no idea what I'm looking at, and they know the spreadsheet inside and out, and they're looking at numbers and going to cells and moving around, and I can't catch. I'm just trying to figure out which number they were talking about. I have no idea exactly what they're trying to display on the spreadsheet. However, when you know the spreadsheet and you have the context and you work with it all the time, it makes total sense. And so that's the way I just interpreted what you said. If you're new to this and you don't know, and you don't have that context, it sounds very complicated. When you do it all the time, it sounds exact. It's a perfect description of what it's like.
thank you, Chris. And you've had a couple of very good analogies, or I think those are called analogies, like
I
about the
think they
Excel
are. Yeah.
sheet and about the baseball
Yep.
umpire, that calling balls and strikes. That's very good. So it occurred to me as I was making those 1,000 and some rolls during the KBC Augusta tournament in August. I thought, you know what? Like, it is so clear in my mind what scores I'm giving. I'm like, let me write it down. Just as a bit of a attempt to get more people to give a try to this measurement that I find very, very useful. So here's how it works in practice. In general, on the types of putting greens that I usually see, which are, golf courses that have 100% grass cover, and
Mm-hmm.
they're maintained by professionals, it's really rare to get anything less than a 6. So the scores basically is going to be 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. That the
Mm-hmm.
bottom end of the scale, which is like bobbling, snaking, and chatter throughout the roll. I mean, who's producing greens like that these days? It's like probably not a lot of people that are listening to this.
Probably not a person who's going to spend the time doing the bobble test.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. And I mean, and if you are, I'm not making. I mean, if that is the type of conditions that you have, and you are, um, you know, watching this or listening to it, I'm not making fun of you. Um, and it's just like it's just rare to have those kind of conditions, you know.
I can say that the only time I've ever seen a 5 on our greens is directly out of winter one year, just for fun, just to see. I did some stimping on the greens before we had touched the surface at all. So there was lots of sand and there was sort of debris from the winter, and I did it and I got some 5s, but that was it. On a green that's actually been prepared, a 6 is the lowest I've ever seen. So, and we do have them on occasion because, as you said, um, if the ball hits a pitch mark or a
Mhm.
grain of sand, which it does on occasion, that's a 6. So once in a while, I
If
do see it.
if hitting it causes it
Comes
to
off
leave
the
the
ground.
ground.
Yep.
So here's let's go through the original definition from that Perfectly True article, which I'll put a link to in the description. Well, there's a link to it in the blog post, so you can get that article from the blog post. So a 6, which is kind of the low end of what we would expect on greens, is chatter dominates. Remember, that's where there's vertical deviation, but we can't see that the ball leaves the ground, with possibly single bobble events and some snaking. So if the ball leaves the ground, it's not going to get above a 6 because there's no room for bobble on good greens. No golfer wants to see the ball bounce. And
Mm-hmm.
6 is like the maximum you get if there's a single bobble event. If you start bobbling more than once, then that's where the ball leaves the ground. Now the score is going to be 5 or below. But it's so rare to see that I'm not going to talk about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's 2 scores above that on the original scale, So the 7 is blank. So you're allowed to give a 7, but they don't define what it is. It's just somewhere between 6, which is chatter dominates with possibly single bobble events and some snaking, up to 8. 8 is predominantly smooth, but with single isolated chatter events and minimal snaking. 10 is perfect roll, no chatter or snaking. Obviously, no bobble. Now, what I have been doing for a few years is doing the scale that I put on the right side of this table, which I label as the ATC scale, and I define it basically the same as STRI, but I also put a score for 9. I define what happens when we give a 9, what happens when we give a 7, and I add a little bit more context. So on a 6, I say it's either a single bobble or 3 or 4 chatter or snaking events. That's a 6. That's what I give a 6. If it's worse than that, which is almost continuous chatter and or snaking or 2 bobble events, it's a 5. But that's rare. It's rare to have continuous chatter, snaking, and 2 bobble events. Now for 7 happens, there's no bobble. There can't be a bobble with a 7, but it's 2 chatter events or 2 snaking events or 1 chatter plus 1 snake. That is, I see 2 clear deviations from a perfect roll. So it's like, if that's what you see, the score is 7. It's not like, do I give it an 8? Do I give it a 7? Do I give it a 6? It's when you see no bobble and it chatters twice, it's like, boom, that's a 7.
When you do this all the time and you see it over and over and over again, you don't ponder the score at all. You just know it. You see it and you know it right away. It's unquestioned.
Yep.
Really, I think, and that might be something people think about is, oh, how much extra time is this going to take? It's 0. It's just, to me, it's automatic. The ball rolls down and I go 7, ball rolls again, 8, ball rolls again, up, it jumped off the ground, 6. And then I quickly add those numbers up, 6, 7, 13, 8, 21. And that's how I record it on a scorecard. And then when I put it into my spreadsheet, it averages it out.
Exactly. So you had that insight of a really easy way to do it, because you can keep those numbers in your head. So, or I keep those numbers in my head and then I write them down. So I'm like, okay, 7, 7, 8. That's a 22. So I write down a 22. I roll back 3 balls in the other direction. It will be like 8, 8, 8, 24. So now I've got a 22. I've got a 24. And then that goes into the spreadsheet or the software and it gets divided by 6. And our number is going to be 7.66 or something like that.
Yep.
But
so
yeah,
I don't score. I've had times where I at one time I would score between a 7 and an 8. Like I might say a 7.5, which I think is fine. But I've found that that's not really necessary. Sort of the way that it's set up, as you said, is between a 6 and an 8 is a 7, and between an 8 and a 10 is a 9. And so I just give it a number without a decimal, and then the decimal comes from the average.
Exactly.
Over 18 greens.
Exactly. And if I see one that I think, you know what, like that was a pretty bad 7, and then it's like, well, then I just watch the next one really carefully, and I'm like, wow, that was a really bad 7. Okay, that's a 6, right? So now I feel comfortable that, like, okay, I've given a 7, but it was almost like worse than a 7, and then the next one was also bad. But I'm like, it didn't bobble, but it was a bad 7. Okay, it's a 6. So now I know that between those 2 rolls, it's gonna be 6.5.
I do the same.
And so as you do this, you just realize that, like, there's a certain number that it sort of has to be. And I think we converge on the same way of doing it. 8. So a 7 for me is there's 2 deviations from a perfect roll that are not bobbles. So it's either 2 chatters or 2 snakings or 1 chatter plus 1 snake. 8 is almost perfect. And it's pretty common to see 8s and 9s. 8 is almost perfect, but I've clearly seen either a single chatter or single snaking event. It's not something Chris, are you getting phone calls that you need to
I,
take?
I am, but I that's my office phone, which tends to be not something I need to answer usually. So
Okay,
it's not a
cool.
concern.
Cool. Well,
Although
let's
they are calling twice. No,
no. Okay.
it's fine.
Okay. Uh
If they call a third time, I might answer.
okay. So we'll back to our exciting uh dis- discussion here of what an 8 is. An 8 is almost perfect, but you clearly see a single chatter or a single snaking event, and that's common. It's common. Even you watch on TV, you watch it. Watch professional tournaments on TV. The ball often snakes at the end. It'll be a perfect
Mm-hmm.
roll, and you'll often see it snake at the end,
Yep.
which is a lateral deflection from the intended path. Um,
You've done some work on this, which I think is interesting. Doing this before when set up for play, and then at the end of the day. And I would imagine, as I've watched tournaments on TV, what I notice is that as the day goes on, there is you probably do go down to eights with regularity because on putts, as a golfer's putting it, because they're generally putting towards the hole. So as they putt towards the hole, they're just encountering more foot activity, and
mm-hmm.
that's going to have a negative impact on the ball roll
Yeah, I've got a
to some
blog.
degree.
I've got a blog post about that specifically, and an
Yep.
ATC double cut episode about that specifically, which is what was the title on that one? The title on that one was, what did I call that? One additional chatter or snaking event in every third ball roll. And that's what I measured during the KBC Augusta tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And you can check out that blog post or that episode for what specifically I meant by that. I measured this at the Catalunya Championship also in Spain last year, which is a European Tour event last year. That was on bent grass greens. And on bent grass greens, it dropped by almost like one additional chatter or snaking event per roll. So
Mm-hmm.
if you were like at a 9 in the morning, by the end of play, it would be something like an 8. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
because the grass gets scuffed up and you
Yep.
get more pitch marks. So, and you get more, mostly it's pitch marks, really, because
Yep.
you got 150, 160 professional golfers. They hit the ball near the hole.
Yep.
And I mean, they hit the ball on the green, right? So I'm making those
Yep.
measurements around the green, and it's just more likely that you're hitting things,
Yep.
and that just happens. And anyway, it's it's pretty easy when you just see a single chatter or snaking event. That is an 8. And then 9 is a score on really good greens. 9 is really common because it's an almost perfect roll and it's uncertain if I saw any deviation or not. And you might say, well, that's really subjective. But the thing is, you often are uncertain if you saw any deviation or not, because we don't just want to give perfect scores out of like, oh, that's perfect, that's perfect, that's perfect. So if you're actually watching it, you're like, yeah, that's not a clear chatter. And at the end it's not like really snaking, but it's sort of like, did it finish like exactly straight, or did the ball tilt
Fall
sideways just a
a little bit.
little bit?
Yep.
And
Yep.
well, it's not 10 because there's some question in my mind, because I'm looking at it with a critical eye. So it's not a 10, because a 10 I know when I see it. There's no chatter or snaking. I'm certain that I've observed a perfect roll. There's absolutely no visible deviation from a true roll. And what you'll see when you're rolling the ball down the stimp meter is, not only is it obviously a perfect roll, but those balls will just like be right next to each other, or they'll
They'll all
hit
be in the same spot.
right.
They'll hit
And
each other
right.
typically.
Yeah, they'll hit each other. And and it's not only that it rolled perfectly to get there, but they all finish in exactly the same spot.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
and you're like, yeah, that's often like, okay, that was 10-9-10 or 10-10-9 or something. But it's rare.
Yep.
Now maybe on bent grass greens, maybe at your level of club you get that more often, but I I generally am seeing a lot of 9s on really good greens with a few 10s mixed in there.
For the
That's
most part,
typically what I see.
yep. When we get to the point where where we want to be, it will be mostly nines with the occasional 10, and on the other end, an occasional 8. But what will happen for us is we'll get to the point where our scores, and I'll observe the rolls, and I'll be like that's a 9, a 9, a 9, maybe a 10. And then, at that point, I don't record it anymore. I'm always aware of it. And if I were to start to see that I go out some morning and I start to roll and I'm like, oh, that's a 7, a 7, an 8. And I go to the next green and I get a 7, a 7, and maybe a 6. And all of a sudden I go, okay, wait a minute, something. But that doesn't typically happen. Usually what happens with us is if we start the season and it rises up. And once the grass is completely supporting the roll of the ball, now it gets into a 9 consistently every day. And then if we do something, airify, which we did this summer in August, that will go down and then we'll come back up. Would you like me to share my screen, Micah? This might be a good time to show that. Does that?
Yeah. All right. So we got the bobble test data up. Is that what are we looking at here, Chris?
So we see the dates across the bottom, and then you see the bobble test score, the average score on which is identified by the blue dots, and there's numbers, so it looks a little bit jumbled, but I think you get the idea. And then behind it, you actually see scores from previous years.
Mm-hmm.
But pay attention to the blue with the numbers, and what you'll see is the beginning of the year, which is May 1st. That's very early in the golf season in Minnesota. You'll see these numbers are 7, averages of 7. There's a couple of little high 6s there. And then this climbs as the grass starts to grow, and it grows through the sand that we put down before the winter. And it climbs up, and you'll see some numbers in there. It'll get up into the 8s, and then it regresses a little bit back to the 7s. And then about June 1st or so, it starts, now we're into the 8s consistently, into the high 8s, and then you get into June, and now it's getting close to 9. And then really you could see this does take some time to get to where we want it to be. It does take some time to 9. So I don't want anyone to think that 9 is just an automatic score. You can see here it was almost the end of June when we consistently were getting into the 9s.
Mm-hmm.
And then through July, I just would observe almost all 9s on the rolls. So I just sort of consider that to be a 9 plus through there. But then I'm going to move this a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Then you did, yeah. This year you did that cultivation event in early August. So what
Yep. So
happened there?
can you see that now, Micah?
Yeah.
Column
So
W.
so yeah. So what are the lines? The horizontal lines? Is it at 6 and then 8? Is that what those lines are at?
6, and then 6 and 8. Yes, correct. And
6,
then the
8,
very
and
top would be 10.
okay.
Yep.
All right.
And
So
so,
you were 9 to 10, but
yep,
closer to 10 all the way
yep,
through the end of July. And
yep.
then what happened?
And then we aerified in August. We did a solid tining with sand, and you can see in the days immediately after that, we were back into the 6s. And then as the grass grew through the sand, as those holes healed, it took a little bit of time for us to build back up towards the 9. Almost, almost really half a month. 2 weeks, I would say 2 to 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, before we were consistently up into the 9s again. So, the point that makes is when we do something, and now granted that was a more disrupted practice than we would typically do. It certainly isn't a maintenance Monday type of thing. That's an actual like full on cultivation event. But I think what we need to pay attention to, and the reason I bring this up, is that it does impact the surface, and it impacts the surface when you're doing it with this type of when you're looking at it in this way and you're doing this type of testing and rating. It impacts the surface for a good amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen even a brushing event, even a small top dressing which we've done before in the spring of the year, does impact this for a certain amount of time. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think this is brilliant because I think like the advanced use of this is to say, okay, you wouldn't have done that cultivation and top dressing if you didn't think it was a necessary work.
Right.
But now you know how long it took to recover. You know the
Yep.
method that you use. You knew the tine size. You know the amount of sand, and you know the way you brushed it in and everything. And you
Yep.
know now. So here's our recovery curve exactly. And you've got that for green speed, but we're not going to talk about it. We're just talking
Yep.
about the bobble test here. So it shows the magnitude of disruption and how long it took to recover. So if you need to do that again in your career, then you can know, number one, you can predict how long it's going to take to recover back to the pre-treatment level. Secondly, if you want to change something and you can see, well, did that help me get better 2 days earlier or not? So
Yep.
if you change, or what if you make a bigger tine, a bigger hole, or put less sand, or use wetting agents every 3 days after you do the sand, and somehow that makes it better. I don't know.
Yep.
And I think like the advanced use of this bobble test is like checking before and after play, or before and after, start of the day, end of the day, and then
Yep.
recovery from certain events.
Yep.
I think that can be so useful. Like if you know that information, you're in control of what's going on, and you can communicate about it and say, look, that was disruptive, but it lasted this long, and then
Hmm.
the next year when you're going to do it, you're going to say, you know what, we're going to do this technique, and we're going to shorten that by 3 days. And then you can check if you actually achieve it. So
Yep. Yep.
very good. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna. I know you've shared a lot of this data with me, and I haven't made any charts of that, but I have some code on my computer from last year where I summarize it, and I think if we do the ATC office hours next
Hmm.
month, probably like we have the past couple of years, I'll try to make some charts in my uh, format that I think don't have the numbers on it. It'll show the exact line a little bit more
Yeah.
clearly.
It'll be fun too. This is we're well, less than a year away from this, but next year we have the U.S. Amateur, and the plans are for you to come and spend time here during that event, and hopefully that'll work out, and hopefully we can do some work with this sort of before and after play. Maybe we can look at areas around the hole, and come up with some fun ways to sort of look at this test and see what the impact of play is. You have
Mm-hmm.
during the U.S. Amateur, you have 4 days of full field play around a hole, and what will be really interesting. Oh man, maybe this is an offline conversation, but we can do it here. We have a uh, group of listeners who will appreciate it. Is we will, when they play the qualifying round for the U.S. Amateur, they leave the hole in the same place for 2 consecutive days, and there's a lot of golf that takes place. So it'll be interesting to maybe look at an area around the hole when it's prepared for play before any rounds are played, and then at the end of the first round, and then before the second round, and it will be anyway
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
exciting to think about.
yeah. Carl Scamenti asked me when I was sharing some of the data that I'd collected during the KBC Augusta tournament in regards to the bobble test, and Carl Scamenti from Cornell University was asking me if I'd measured specifically around the hole, and I didn't exactly, but because when I'm measuring on those particular greens, the way I do it at the KBC Augusta tournament, I'm measuring 3 greens in 3 different locations. So I end up almost always, the hole location is very near one of
Mm-hmm.
my bobble test measuring locations.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually have some videos that I shot showing the rolls at the end of the day. And I need to check my archives if I shot that morning also. But certainly it's going to be a discussion point to uh, try to explain what I have observed, and answer that very good question from Carl. And
Yep.
yeah, I'm hopefully I can make it to the U.S. Amateur next year and make some of those kind of measurements. And yeah, it's interesting. I think it's fun to know that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, maybe we'll play catch too. You I will encourage everybody sign up for Chris's Substack, and you'll get his podcast through that also, which you can also get his podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. But he's got a Substack, and your recent post, the most recent one I've read, was about your new baseball glove. Did that get broken
Yep.
in yet?
It's broken in pretty well. A major leaguer might not want to use it in a game, but it's I'm pretty happy with it. So
Awesome.
it's been a fun little thing. And when I got this glove, I wondered what my wife would say about it, and she likes to give me grief about things that I do, and I can be kind of a dork and a big child sometimes, but anyway, she didn't give me too much grief about the glove. There was about 30 minutes of, talk of a midlife crisis and that, and then she seemed to settle into realizing that seems like a pretty reasonable thing. So she doesn't give me a hard time about carrying it around the house and wearing it while I watch baseball games on TV or listen on the radio. So
Good. Good. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah,
the only time she has commentary is when she comes to bed and the glove is in her laying on the bed in the bed on her side, and then she doesn't tend to like that. But
Well, yeah, maybe I may not have my own glove, but maybe next year I can borrow. Can I borrow one of your old ones?
we got lots of gloves. Well, are you left-handed?
Oh no, I'm not. No.
No.
Oh, I'll borrow a
So
glove from somebody, or we
I should
can.
say, the best thing about being left-handed as a kid was I never liked people playing with my stuff, my
Mm-hmm.
toys or my things as I grew up. And so I think one of the great things about being left-handed is that extended to my baseball gloves. I didn't like people to mess around with them. And, I was very particular about them. And so being left-handed, nobody could ever use my glove. So, that was fortuitous. But
Well, that's good.
anyway, I
Well,
think
yeah.
we can
Well, so
find
that's a
you.
good way. That's a good way to answer that. Yeah. So I'm
We can find you a glove, Micah. We can find
okay.
you a glove.
Good. Good. If I'm not busy measuring before and after bobble test
Right.
numbers.
We'll have some time to play catch during the AM, I think.
All right. Well, we have exhausted the bobble test topic, or we've gone through it pretty good. I guess one more thing about the bobble test that I just want to hear what you have to say about it is, like, I feel like nobody's doing it,
Mm-hmm.
at least in the U.S., right? Like,
Yeah.
do you know anybody else that's doing it?
I've run across a few people who have said that they're doing it. I can't, nobody in my like friendship circle here in the Twin Cities, but I was recently, you can maybe see my
Mm-hmm.
souvenir here.
Oh yeah,
I was at the
that looks familiar.
Ryder Cup in Italy, and
That's a
I ran
flag,
into a
right?
few
So
people.
for those
It's a
listening,
yeah.
that's a flag that
This is the
flew at the Ryder Cup.
Yep.
Ryder Cup 2023. Marco, is it Simone?
Pretty cool experience to be there with
Help me with the
um,
pronunciation, Chris. Is
Marco Simoni.
Marco Simone? Okay.
Yeah, and the director of agronomy and the golf course superintendent Alejandro Reyes and Laura Arias are friends of mine, and I might say friends of yours too, Micah. You spent time with them during the 2016 Ryder Cup here at
I
Hazeltine.
I I certainly did. We had some wonderful conversations and a lot of laughs. Took some beautiful pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I was so glad to see them do the Ryder Cup and have it be such a success. Although I was kind of rooting for the Americans, but
Well,
to win.
it was
But as far as the
it.
course goes, it was a resounding success.
Well, the course was beautiful, and they did a wonderful job. And Laura is now the first female superintendent of a Ryder Cup, and she's such a special individual. And I'm happy to know her and have met her here at Hazeltine, and have gotten to be a friend of hers, and I was really proud of the work that she did there that week. And it was amazing. And it's interesting for me because, of course, as an American, I might want to see the Americans win. But also, for knowing what it's like to watch your team win at your home venue, which I got to do here at Hazeltine. It makes it that much more fun. So for all my friends, all the Europeans that I met and all the wonderful new friends I made that week, it was really great to be able to see them experience that same thing and watch kind of a victory by their team, because it does make it a lot better. So,
And you started that Ryder Cup uh, story with something about you were transitioning from how we don't know really people in your friend group in the U.S. doing bobble test, and then
yes, sorry. Um, so what I did, I did run across a couple of people who I didn't know previous, who were at the Ryder Cup, who came up and said that they follow my writing and your videos and your work, Micah, and that it is something. It seems like that's being done in very small amounts, but I think there are people who have been following what we've been talking about and are finding this to be a useful tool in assessing their playing conditions. So, I think there's a little bit of it out there. And if you're listening to this and you think, I really would like to start doing that, or that seems like it'd be very useful, I would just tell you, the best way to start doing it is to just start. There's no better way than to just start. Look at the chart, maybe save Micah's chart that he has on your phone, make it easily accessible,
table.
and then
Let's
or the
call it a
table.
table.
Sorry, yes. Save that table on your phone and make it very accessible, and start to do this. And I think you'll very quickly find it to be valuable.
I agree. And if you're in New Zealand and everybody does this, and you think I'm an idiot for talking about it, or you think I or Chris and I are trying to claim some kind of ownership over this idea or something that's not intended. If you're in if you're STRI, if you're in the UK and you do this all the time, and it's just we don't know about that because we haven't done greenkeeping in those places. But I've read articles by STRI agronomists about how they're teaching people how to do it, and that was part of their system. And I know people in New Zealand also do this. So we learned from them, and people like Keith McAuliffe, who I also thought he'd be a great guy to talk with. I think formerly with NZSTI, who've been promoting benchmarking. They call it benchmarking, or he calls it benchmarking, and it's something that he was advocating for 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and it would just kind of fell on deaf ears when I was hearing it, or not deaf ears, but I hear it, but I just didn't register how it would be so important. I didn't start doing this till 2019. So now I bring up that certainly in the parts of the world where I do a lot of work, which is a lot of places, I don't find a lot of people doing this. And I know you do it, but there's not a lot of people doing it as far as I know. And I would just say, hey, this is something that I think is potentially really quite useful.
Yeah.
And when it comes to readjusting the work and trying to optimize, I would almost go as far as to say that this is essential, because otherwise you run the risk of doing things like I was at a golf course yesterday. That's Bermuda grass greens near Tokyo. They've been top dressed one time this year. We're recording this. It is already past the middle of October. Those greens were top dressed in the spring once. Who's managing Bermuda grass greens and top dressing once in 6 months? There's not a lot.
It doesn't seem like that's common.
Right. Those greens were really quite good. We rolled some balls, and I looked at it. I would give those an 8 on the bobble test. This is a course that they do about 70,000 rounds a year. That is a pretty busy golf course. Yesterday they had 60 groups, and the greenkeeper told me that it wasn't so busy that day because normally they would have 70. So, it's a busy golf course, and the ball roll is quite good. Were they a little bit soft underfoot? Yeah, but are they too soft for that kind of course? No. And uh, is uh, is that going to be fine going into the winter when the grass is going to be dormant in that part of the world, and that's going to get beaten down? I think it's fine to be like that. So
Hmm.
so what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that it astounds me that those kind of conditions can be produced, and you can document that it's okay by measuring the bobble test, by measuring the green speed, by tracking the firmness. And if things are going wrong, then these type of measurements will tell you that it's going wrong and tell you that you need to intervene and tell you that it's not working what you're doing. You need to verticut more often, you need to top dress more often, and so on. And the whole thing about calibrating how much to do and how often to do it can only be done in the context of what are you trying to produce, and then are you
Right.
achieving it or not. So I wrote about it in the blog post. You and I have talked about this before. The whole idea is find the standard that you're trying to produce at your facility, which is that's going to be different every place in the world, but it's going to be some certain combination that may even change seasonally of green speed, bobble test minimum, and firmness level, and then count the number of days in the year during which you achieve this. And I've also recommended, if you don't want to do it every day, which I think is perfectly fine, I recommend to people just start off by measuring this once a week and then multiply that times 7. So you just
Hmm.
assume that you make a representative measurement once a week. So you can get, that's how you get started, is just do this once a week and do it for a year. So now if you've got a 30-week season, you've now got 30 measurements. That's 210 days. And if you've got a 52-week season, that's 365 days, because you just multiply it by 7, and then count the number of days that you reached your target, and then the
Right.
next year you try to do better.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, again, it's, we talk about it a lot, and we have talked about it a lot, and some people might start to consider it preaching or something of that nature, but it's very valuable, and our my goal is to, again, have the best conditions possible, and for as many days as possible, and this is helping us to do that. So.
Yeah, I feel like we have to evangelize it a little bit, because
Mhm.
if 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 we don't evangelize it and don't do some kind of promotion of it or talk about it again and again, somehow it people don't do it. And
Yeah, it goes away.
because it seems to be so valuable, that's why we keep talking about it, and I keep encouraging people to do useful things, and to avoid doing things that are not useful. And so when I see things
Hmm.
done on a calendar schedule, and it's not, and then people can't tell me what the results that are being produced, I'm like, okay, well, that's how I used to do things when I was a greenkeeper.
Hmm.
That's not what I recommend now. And when I do consulting work, I don't want to give a calendar schedule. I want to teach people how to employ this system so that they can figure out what's going to be optimal for their facility. So let's have another long conversation about this. When we do an ATC office hours at the end of the year, where we'll talk about uh, a lot of the organic matter stuff, sand stuff, and we don't even have these
Yep.
test results yet, so we'll see uh, how those come out. That will be interesting, and that one may be a live stream, and we may have a chat so we can answer questions. So
Yep.
hopefully we'll be able to get that done in the next month or so. And then, yeah, if you fire up your podcast again for season 2, I would be happy to be a guest on that too, and we can talk about something other than the bobble test. I'm sure, like
That would be great.
how.
I'm sort of I'm doing some very mild planning for my season 2, and thinking about who my guest might be, and you might be a good person to start that season 3 off soon.
Is it
So
season 3?
Oh, I'm sorry. Season two. I don't know what I was thinking about. So season two.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
Chris, thank you. Is there anything else that we've missed before we
I,
say goodbye?
I don't think so. I think we've covered the bobble test well. We've added some humor. We talked about wearing dragonflies for potential insect repellent,
Mm-hmm.
and we've covered a couple other topics in the middle. So I think it will be. I hope people will listen.
Yeah, and I would be especially interested to have some feedback because I have the feeling like nobody's doing this, and then
Hmm.
I've been recommending it for a while, and you're actually doing it, so
Hmm.
maybe that gives some legitimacy to it. I would just
Yeah.
like to have some feedback from people of like, I mean, if you're saying it's subjective and it's too subjective and the number won't mean anything to you, but you haven't tried it yet, I would just encourage you to try it, roll the ball enough times, and you can see there's only a limited number of things that can happen to the ball, and each of those things that happen cause it to have a certain score. So
Yeah.
yes, it's subjective, but it's a useful subjective. It's the same thing that golfers are seeing. So I
Yeah.
would encourage people to do it if you want to. If you want to like try to optimize, try to keep getting better, and you want to use this kind of system, there's a lot of ways you can try to get better and try to optimize that aren't this way. But this is the way that I like to do it. So I would encourage people to do it and give some feedback if you just if you just are still don't see a utility in it, or you find it doesn't work. I would be interested to hear that too, because I hate to recommend things that, yeah, it's like it makes me worried when I'm recommending and evangelizing things that nobody's doing. That I'm sort of like, am I the one that's barking up the wrong tree here? So yeah, send some feedback,
Well,
please.
I think we go. I know Doug sold that. I've heard him say this about clipping volume, and you've said it about things too. And he has said I've yet to find the person who started doing it that has decided it wasn't worth it and stopped. So I think this is another example of that type of information that can be collected. I think once you start doing it, you'll find it valuable enough that you will keep doing it.
Well, that is a great way for us to end. So thank you, Chris, for joining. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And I will say goodbye for ATC from Tochigi. I am Micah Woods. Bye bye.